So friends, another year of Lent begins, and I must confess I'm quite biased when it comes to Lent, because I think Lent is top notch. I think it's great. Advent is nice, but Lent is better, I think. Because, when it comes to Advent, we get so distracted with the build up to Christmas and the lights and the ooh and the ah and all the razzmatazz, as we should, because it's a beautiful and good season of joy and hope. But Lent is more serious, because, it calls us to arms here in the heart, to enter deeper into the interior battle that takes place here. Because it's here where our destiny plays out. It's here, what comes out of here and out of here has all the effects around us. Lent is important because it's a real call, folks, to dive a lot deeper into our hearts and our lives and to search, with God's help, not on our own, with God's help through prayer, what areas in my life do I need to jettison, get rid of? Or what areas of my life do I need to improve on to get closer to God, closer to others? We're called to do this, everybody, because it's what Lent leads to. It's not a thing of its own. It's not something we do just for the fun of it, or that it's just a phase we have to go through. Lent leads to something, and we all know that it leads to Easter, the resurrection of Christ, celebration of God's life in the resurrection. And that's why I think the paschal candle, it is such a beautiful and a good symbol of Christ and of our beautiful Catholic Christian faith, that by the end of Lent, we should have scooped out a lot of dead wax in ourselves and put more of the flame of Christ in us, to scoop out more of ourselves and put more of Christ in there, little by little. Not big, huge, massive swathes that we can't control or work on, but little by little. So that faith, like the paschal candle, should illuminate more through us by the end of Lent. We should become more shinier by the end of Lent than when we began, is what I'm saying essentially. That the faith of Christ is illuminated a little bit more through us and in us. That we scoop out our selfishness, those places that are quite destructive in our lives. See, that's why, folks, Lent is a real call to holiness, remembering that it's salvation. Our salvation is what's at stake at the end of the day here. That's why, Lent, the last number of while, it has taken on a kind of a new persona, which I don't think fairly justifies its existence and why we do this. If you notice, what's the big thing that is, how would you say, it's almost not forced on us, but it's all our attention should be on when it comes to Lent? Almsgiving, social justice. We're bombarded by that as if Lent is only about that alone, which of course it's not. That's part of it, but it's not the whole thing. Lent is far more richer and far more rewarding when we look at the fuller scope of what we're doing and starting here today, essentially. Yes, the trocar box in front is all part of it, we're to give more of ourselves to others. And see, if that's all if that's all Lent is about for us, is putting a couple of coins in a trocar box and that's it, we're missing the point of what it's about. Why are we doing that? Why do we put coins in a trocar box in the first place? Very simply, become less selfish and more selfless. We give to others. That's why Lent is part Lent is giving alms to the poor. If we have surplus of something, maybe help somebody out in need. That's why, giving alms, everybody, along with interior prayer and examination, it should give us more room in here for Christ, essentially. Lent is about combating selfishness at the end of the day. And what's the number one cause of selfishness? Sin. Sin is a cause of selfishness. Sin is what contorts us to become selfish. We start to turn in on ourselves. The more we turn in on ourselves, the more we sin, the more we're going to fill here with me only. Why? So that we start to reach a point, if that's all we're about, we start to reach a point where material things, people, desires and thoughts, they serve me. They turn us on ourselves rather than towards God. And Lent is a time of launching a war on sin. Folks, sin makes us very sick. It really does. It's what makes society sick. If you want to know why our culture, our world and society at the moment is a little bit crazy, to say the least, it's because sin is widespread. It's celebrated. It's encouraged. I mean, I was reading Jeremiah chapter 14 this morning at morning prayer, and every time I read it, it hits me like a ton of bricks, because he's talking about just how destructive sin is. And we've forgotten all about this, of how dangerous it actually is in our lives when we don't combat it a little bit with God's help. He says, this is what he says. He says, if I go out in the field, behold those who are slain by the sword. He's talking about war. If I enter the city, behold the diseases of famine. We've had enough of that for the past 2 years. He says, both prophet and priest, they ply their trade through the land, but have no knowledge. We looked for peace, he says, but no good came. We looked for healing, but behold, a time of terror. Folks, sin disrupts God's help and his grace in our lives and in society. You and I, we have just begun to emerge, well, it seems anyway, from a time of real psychological and medical terror with the pandemic over the past 2 years. And now we're in a time where World War III looks like a potential possibility, a real threat. We have forgotten how destructive sin actually is, and how it spreads like cancer from a personal sin into all our areas around it, family life, then in society, culture, and nations. Because sin, folks, at the end of the day, it encourages acts and thoughts that are contrary to God, who he is the source of goodness, the source of hope, the source of peace, love, and compassion. If those good things are absent in your life, in here, and in society, it's because God has been blocked. Sin blocks God. And that's why it's so good that Pope Francis, he has called today a day of prayer and fasting for peace, real peace. Lent is a time of warfare against sin, because it's in our hearts where that warfare is waged. It's where I allow the enemy, or not, to get a foothold on my life, to fight against the spirit that seeks to drive God out of me and out of society. Let's not give in to that, folks, this Lent. Let's begin this Lenten season as Christians going into battle against the spirit of evil, like Christ going into the desert, armed with the weapons of prayer and self-denial, so that we arrive at the celebration of the resurrection at Easter with our hearts full of anticipation, full of wanting more of God's love, because we're emptying ourselves, we can fill him more and more in our lives, and looking for more of the hope that God offers us. And then genuine peace can begin to take root in our hearts and in society.